The Candidates 2016 started in Moscow today. 8 players slugging it out over the next 20 days or so to decide who will be the challenger to Magnus Carlsen in November. And really, there's no clear favourite in this tournament. Any of the 8 contenders could win. Of course, some have had decent form coming into the tournament, but once it gets down to it, anything can happen. Now, of the 4 games played today, 3 were drawn and 1 was decisive, and that's the game we're going to look at now. Viswanathan Anand against Veselin Topalov, the two, well, you could say almost veterans playing against each other in the first round. Anand 46 years old, Topalov 40 years old. It was a Berlin, and after 14 moves they've reached this position. Very tense position. Excuse me, just one second. Very tense position where Topalov has exchanged on d4 in this typical Spanish position, and that means he's able to put pressure on Anand's centre. Of course, it's a big risk for Black giving up the centre, but there is huge pressure from Black's pieces. You can see a pin on this diagonal as well. Anand can't get out his bishop. Now, very often that doesn't matter in the Spanish, but actually, you know, White's pieces are treading on each other's toes at the moment. Difficult position. After the game, Anand said, well, this was really the only move to justify or make sense of his position. But this is a brave move. What he wants to do is, so he's attacking the pawn. If this is defended, then White starts to seize the initiative with e5. But typically Topalov decided to give up the b pawn, and this is a very strong move. So it opens up the e file. It puts more pressure on the d pawn, and well, I think both players played very bravely here. I think particularly Anand. I think in a sense, you know, Black's moves are fairly obvious. Black is just going forward here. But Anand is extremely brave taking this pawn. Let's take a look. Excellent move from Toppy, swinging the knight round, maybe coming to c5, maybe e5, but also opening up the queen's diagonal. And this is a tricky position. Afterwards, Vichy said that he probably should have played rook a3 and just given up the exchange here. And he certainly has some compensation, because after this, well, his kingside is safe now, and the queen is attacking some pawns there. He has 2 bishops. Well, he has compensation anyway. Anand played knight c4, and this is probably a bad move. After knight c5, the queen really has to come to c6. If it drops back to b4, then rook b8 is starting to chase the queen around, and there's possibilities to fork here. Queen d2, knight b3, for example. Queen c6 was played instead. That White has to do that, but the queen now no longer has any squares. This is a key position, and Toppy has a couple of very attractive continuations. Maybe bishop f2, well, it's the most obvious move, but Toppy said he really didn't consider this, which is extraordinary, because after this, well, White has to play g3. Toppy said he didn't think of knight e4 check in this position. After this, White can only hang on with only moves, and you know, the machine is telling me that these are basically only moves. First of all, g4 to shut out the bishop. Threat to play bishop e4, and this is an only move. But I tell you what, if you find these moves during the game, you're doing very well. Apparently White can hang on here, but doesn't look obvious to me. Another good move, which Anand had seen, I think Toppy might have seen this as well, was to play f6, and the idea is to bring the bishop back to e8 to trap the queen. Anand thought his best was to play like this, to give up his queen in this position, and he thought he might be able to survive this, but I don't know, after black takes here and maybe puts bishop on b5, not sure. I mean, white obviously has compensation with a rook and knight and a nice centre, but who knows. So a couple of decent options for Toppy, but he went for knight b3, and this was definitely a mistake, although it's still very tricky. Now, I can't go through all the variations here. It's such a complex game. But here, again, it looks as though black has excellent compensation. Pawn down, but that bishop is superb. Queen a6, a very brave move by Anand, but basically what he wants to do is he wants to bring the queen back into the defence along this diagonal, and excellent move. Queen h4, and that gets defended by the rook, and still seems potentially very dangerous, but Anand has worked out that after knight e3 he's got enough counterplay against the pawn on c7, and white's knight basically blocks out black's pieces. This bishop is a slight problem. It is potentially a little bit out of play. So Toppy brought his queen back to defend the pawn on c7, but now it feels as though the game is turning in white's favour. Now, the point of playing the bishop back was to protect the rook, so now black is threatening to play bishop takes knight. But Anand can deal with this. Bishop d3, this is a very important move, because once those bishops are exchanged, then somehow white's position feels a lot safer, and white is taking control. You know, Anand has this passed pawn now. Anand now played a6. He should have played rook d1, exploiting this pin. So the rook is hitting the bishop on d4, and if queen f6 defending that bishop, then king g2 is a very safe move, a very good move, controlling some key squares here, and that pin is very, very annoying for black to deal with. But of course, at move 30 they're heading into time pressure, and a6 is just a bit too loose. Actually, it's probably still good for white. Okay, queen e8 is a good move, defending the rook, threatening bishop e3. Anand defended the knight. If bishop takes, then you can play rook takes, and rook c4 is met by rook e8. This is such a complex game. I mean, there are so many interesting variations. Bishop b6 was played, hitting the queen, queen came back, rook a8. I think if you're short of time, this is a very difficult position to control. My machine is telling me that b4 is a good move, with the idea b5 to protect the a pawn. And if rook takes, then knight c2, a discovered attack, the rook hits the queen and the knight hits the rook. Now, when you're short of time, it's not a move that really crosses your mind. Anand played percentage chess. King g2, very safe, bringing the king off the back rank, controlling f3, defending the pawn, safe move. But it does allow Toppy back into the game. After b3, well, you can't take that pawn with the queen because the rook hangs. So rook d4. And suddenly, you know, you can see white's three pawns split and the rook's really active. It looks as though Toppy has blown it, but I think it's really impressive how Anand somehow gets some control over the position. Played knight c4. Rook takes a6. Now a5, excellent move. White just has enough here to keep black busy. If that's taken, then rook a1 and pin and win. So bishop came to d4. Maybe bishop c5 was a better move, but again, very hard to understand the kind of nuances in this position. And here, suddenly, out of the blue, Anand gets an attack on black's king. Black is distracted by the a-pawn. Black's pieces across the other side of the board, and suddenly the rook's turned towards black's king. And it's extraordinary how powerful this attack is. And now the knight swings into the game. Maybe f5 was a better defence here, but still very unpleasant and very hard to determine why. But after rook c2, knight e4, threatening knight g5 check. For example, if rook takes a5, the knight checks, and this is forced mate. I mean, it's extraordinary how powerful white's attack is. Of course, Anand knows what he's doing with knights. He is legendary in his skill with performing with knights. f6 played, preventing knight g5 check. h4, excellent move, and this bottles in black's king. The threat is to play rook f7 to f8 to h8, checkmating. We can see the point of h4 in a second. Rook a5 played, rook f7, so he's threatening mate. g5, and here's the trick. If you take this, then black's king finds security. But here's why Anand played h4. He pushed on, controlling the g6 square. So now black's king is in the box, and this is the nail. This h-pawn is the nail in the coffin. There is simply no defence to rook f8 and mate. Topi gave up the rook, but to no avail. Mate threatened. I mean, the best that Topalov can do here is to give up a couple of pawns, and this staves off mate for the moment. But in this position, Topalov resigned. He's a clear exchange down. Black can only hang on here with, only moves, but black is utterly lost in this position. So, convincing victory for Anand. Very complicated game. Topi had chances at the start, but after Anand got through that slightly shaky patch, he negotiated his way through pretty well, and this end was very convincing. So Anand starts with a win, as he did 2 years ago in the candidates tournament in Khanty-Mansiysk, and then all the other players also drew. So can Vichy do it again? It would be amazing. He's 46 years old now. If he won this candidates tournament, it would be extraordinary. But let's see. He's got off to a great start. So there we go. There was some very interesting games there. All the other three games were drawn. Giri almost defeated Aronian. Unfortunately, I haven't got time to show the ending to that game. Very hard fought game. Aronian hanging on by the skin of his teeth. So do check out that game. If you want to see the complete moves to this game and also the other games in the first round, do check out the news page on chessbase.com, and that has all the moves of the games. Thanks for watching. See you later. It's going to be great.